Enrolling in the Academy is really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, MCing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.
Yo, what's going on, family?
Everything. You can't call it.
Well, if we are to believe social media, Jason is, like many people in this moment of holiday seasons, not necessarily 100% celebratory. Things are happening in life, and so for all of our friends and loved ones out there that are going through whatever challenges life and the holidays present, you are not alone. This is episode number 19 of No New Leaders. My name's Mozzie. That guy down there is Jason, and that lady over there is Prowess the Testament. What's going on, family? I haven't seen y'all in a minute.
I'm good. I feel like when Jason said I can't call it, maybe I should echo that now. I'm like, it is a lot of stuff happening. And we lost a lot of people over the weekend with Irene Cara, the iconic Irene Cara, and of course, if people are familiar with Hovain, the rapper that passed away, and manager, in his home this weekend. So it's been a lot of grief, I guess, over the last couple of months now.
What about you, Jay? We're just checking in before we really jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think everything is good with me personally. I was a little under the weather, but my family, everybody in my family got sick for a while, but we're all doing well now. Got to see some family over the the weekend and the end of last week. And got to eat some good food. So I'm feeling really blessed. I'm blessed to be on with you guys. I'm blessed to be with my friends and to be representing this great organization that we all kind of did our small parts to help build. And so I'm good. I can't complain.
I'm happy to hear that you have recovered from me rejecting your invitation to come over for dinner. I wasn't quite sure if the whole house was COVID free, so I was like, "Yo, sorry, bro, I'm still not doing crowds."
Yeah, it's all COVID free. That COVID wasn't the issue, but yeah, I totally understand it. Everybody out there, be vigilant with your health. You only get one body, and we particularly as African Americans or Latinos or people of color in general, particularly if you have comorbidities, I always like to say we interviewed a guy who believed in stoicism, and I've been looking up stoicism ever since. And one of the ideas in kind of stoic beliefs is that you're dying every day. Essentially, it sounds morbid, but you're dying every day. And when you look at the average Black man lives to be 72, and I'm about to, I'm going to be 45 in a couple of months. I really want to take time to do the things that I think are important, help people and grow as a person. I only got a little bit of time if I'm going by averages. So, it really puts things in perspective.
On behalf of our entire viewing audience, I want to say in response to you about to be 45, damn, you old.
No doubt. Hey, getting old is a blessing, particularly as a Black man. That's my point.
I'm with it. I'm with it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Jason and I were having a conversation the other day, and I was like, "Bro, so I'm 45. Am I middle age?" He was like, yeah." I was like, "Yeah." I don't even think about myself as being that old because I've only got a few grays. But there is this kind of movement afoot, though, particularly among Black men in between their 40s and their 50s to like embrace going gray, or in some cases dyeing their hair gray to look older. Like I can't believe that. Why am I blanking on his name? David Banner's his beard is really full, like elder gray, full like Asian man in an old school kung fu flick who's an elder gray, like super grayed out gray. But it is. Well, I wanted to continue a conversation that I started last week, talking to myself, as most lonely people do, about this idea of like we've been talking about leadership and who's a leader and who's not a leader for now 19 episodes. But I got to be honest, I have been pleasantly surprised with how expansive people approach the idea of defining leadership. How many people embrace the idea of servant leadership? It might just be my own circle because so many of the guests we brought on are people from my personal circle. But I think that it's important to talk a little bit about the kinds of experiences that we've had and the people in our lives who've helped us shape our understandings of leadership. And I know part of what was the root of my conversation last week was talking to my stepfather about a whole range of things, including things about me that he didn't know. And I'm not bragging about this, but as a child, I was low key a criminal. And I won't get into the crimes that I committed because you'd be like, I don't believe you. No, trust me. I don't need to say what the crimes are. Statutes of limitations are up on all of them. But like, no, I was a real criminal. And my family didn't know about it because my family raised me with punishment. And if you got caught doing something, you got punished for it. Not a lesson taught, but a physical form of repercussions for what you did. So what I learned was not to not do those things that I was doing. What I learned was to not get caught doing those things. And so it made me start thinking about, okay, so if this is how I've learned how to kind of keep myself out of trouble while I'm still in trouble, what other things are my family responsible in some ways for helping shape my understandings of it? Leadership is one of them. Leadership and kind of thinking about the ways in which that we operate in families. You know, a lot of times, at least for the models of leadership I talk about, I take it back to like a religious context, but we could probably also take it back to, you know, our own experiences in our family units. Like I'm the oldest child. Do either of you have siblings, and where do you fall in the ranking? I'm curious.
I'm an only child. And so that's an interesting dynamic in itself, I think.
Okay. And Jay?
I have an older sister.
So you're actually the youngest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And so that's interesting. We have an only child, a youngest, and an oldest talking about leadership. And so I wonder, when you all think about the examples of leadership that are represented by either your mother or your father, your grandparents, aunties, and uncles, what are the kinds of things that about leadership that you feel if you look back, you learned from them? And it doesn't have to be like, you know, it's not that our parents or the people in our family were like the Martin Luther Kings of our neighborhood, but like all of them represented kind of moving a group forward. Either our grandparents with our parents, like looking at the dynamic between them and their friends and social circles, or our parents with us as children, and then us with our siblings. Like, what are the kinds of lessons about leadership that we learn? So, like for me, one of the things that, and I'll be honest, I really have not thought about this. It feels like these are things that should be kind of obvious, things that would come up often, but I really hadn't thought about the role that my grandfather has played in shaping the way that I think about care or about entrepreneurship and the need to have your own hustle, to not be dependent. Like I hadn't really thought about the fact that, you know, he was an entrepreneur. He owned a bar. He was also an enforcer. Like Jason, when he met him, he was like, yo, your grandfather. It was like he used to be kind of D's back in the day. I was like, yeah, because he was an enforcer for a loan shark. That his father was mob connected and murdered while he was a teenager and thinking about how things like that impacted the way that he approached life, community, family, entrepreneurship are things I really have only started to think about recently with my grandfather's passing and my mother's recent passing. So I wonder, I'm talking mostly to give you all time to think about your answers to this question, but maybe Prowse, so we don't step on each other, maybe Prowse, if you want to go first to talk about how it is that you think that your family in particular has shaped, and not general, like maybe think of a specific thing you learned from particular people so we can have this long conversation.
Yeah. So I tend to think about the fact of, I mean, there's so much of what has happened in my family in the last half century. I feel like part of one dynamic, right? My grandfather migrated here from Cuba in the early, would have been probably the late 20s, and came here to play baseball. And I feel like part of his journey um, came from seeking leadership, right? A sort of seek the need for, what do I do next? What's my where do I find belonging? How do I navigate sort of in being an immigrant in this space and sort of not being aware, I think at that time, very much like of what of where he belonged, right? Am I where do I stand on the sort of in the midst of Jim Crow and everything that was happening, sort of post Reconstruction era, all of those things that were kind of changing demographics and dynamics in our country for people of color. And I think that that certainly did affect a lot of how my family was oriented and led, because my grandfather also, when he came here, and like I said, he played pro, but he did not play. But he wound up getting involved in the lumber market in North Carolina, and went there to find work. Right, after a certain point, I need to get a job and find out how to make some work, make an opportunity, and wind up being working in the hardwood field, and was a lumberjack. And I think a lot of the orienting of that kind of sort of thinking around finding community, not really sure where he belonged, not really sure how to identify. Where do I stand? Where do I go? I don't have any family here. I don't know anyone. I just came because, sort of seeking a dream. It's a classic, I feel like, story around where community becomes your, family, and has that early influence on how I think his children, which are my aunts and uncles and my mom, sort of oriented themselves to sort of their big picture view around the community, because the community then really became, the community leadership really became his family. And my grandfather being the oldest child, oldest son too, at that point, right? It's sort of like, I have to come here and make it so I can bring all my other siblings. And that's essentially what type of leadership that I was instilled or taught, was that, the idea of accountability, responsibility, of being able to come to a place, create community, create family, so that and create a home, and then be able to bring your family, your immediate family. He brought all his siblings here, which were, a lot. He had 14 siblings, so he brought them here, his mother here, and then they all sort of wind up coming, eventually immigrated to DC, and yeah, I think that very much kind of created a certain dynamic around the fact that there's sort of a matriarchy, because now bringing mother, his father had passed, so he wasn't able to bring him, but just the fact that, right, the mother was the center, my great grandmother, the center of the family, and then the spirit of sort of service, I think that was cultivated in, like, I'm doing a community good, in terms of being in the lumber field, which is a community type of job, right? You cannot be the lumber world is a very sort of group oriented type of field, and North Carolina, the softwood lumber that they produce requires a lot of hands and a lot of stakeholders, and so I think that definitely influenced my how I grew up and how my parents grew up and what my idea of family leadership looks like.
You know, you bring up great points. We had Seymour Bell tune in and said, biblical, to whom much is given, much is required. Marvel, with great power comes great responsibility. First kid syndrome, is leadership an art, a science, or a gift? Are leaders born or made? You know, I'm a little embarrassed to admit, you brought this up on a previous show, the fact that you have Cuban ancestry. And it's interesting. My grandfather is Puerto Rican and Venezuelan. So I'm also coming from an Afro-Latino point of view because my father's African-American and my mother is Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, and Italian. And then, so we're bringing these kind of other cultural perspectives, experiences. My grandfather wasn't an immigrant. His father wasn't an immigrant, but his father's father was. And so thinking about even being, you know, 2 generations removed, or 2 generations from being a first generation American has a particular context. Jason, I wonder, when you start to think about the reason I wanted to continue this conversation about families, I was literally sitting on the couch last night with Cameron, my wife, and she was bringing up, you know, she said, I always forget that Dr. Nichols is Jason's father because she studied under your father at Hopkins. And so it's interesting to know that, like, she's had her own experience with your family in a professional context. I put quotes just to say, of course, that is your father, but to say, like, she didn't experience him as your family, just experienced him as a person in the world doing what he does. I wonder, who are the people that you would say, if you're thinking back over your knowledge of your family's lineage, that have shaped the way that you think about leadership. I had the privilege to meet your grandmother, or one of your grandmothers, in Harlem a number of years ago. I had to say it with the Hasidic accent for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so and I'm also 2 generations removed from immigrant ancestry, but I wouldn't say that, to be honest, I can't say that really influenced me. But my my father grew up in Germany, non-military, and in part because his father knew he wouldn't get the kind of jobs that he wanted in the United States, so he had to leave. So my father essentially grew up in post-World War II Germany as a, you know, or my, you know, my grandparents, my father, my uncles grew up in post-World War II Germany as a Black family. And, you know, when my father returned, the world wasn't connected the way it is now. You know, there was no internet, there's no hip hop to connect people. That it was, you know, he didn't have the context for a lot of what was going on in the United States, particularly coming in the middle of the Black Power movement. And so he read a lot of books to catch up. And, you know, I think that is something that influenced me, is when you don't know something, look for the answer, which I think is an important part of leadership, is recognizing that you don't have the answer to everything, and that other people have experienced, there's nothing new under the sun. Other people have experienced something similar. So you can also find strategies in other places. I think when I think of my father and what I've learned from him in particular, that I'm really just kind of, you know, understanding now as a father myself, is Since Seymour brought up a biblical quote, I'll bring one up too. And that is that there's a part of the Bible, I think it's in Psalms, where it says, I've never seen a righteous man forsaken, nor his children begging for bread. And so one of the things that in my father's leadership, whether it was professional, whether it was in his churches, church communities that he's been a part of, he's a deacon of a church right now. Regardless, of where it is, he tries to do whatever he does with the utmost integrity. And I got to admit, that wasn't something that I, always knew or always put at the forefront. I don't think I ever tried to hurt people intentionally, but understanding how important integrity is to leadership is a lesson that I know my father has been trying to teach me for a long time. But now that I have children, it really, really is hitting home. And so, understanding the importance of integrity, understanding how that will affect how you're remembered. When I think of, even my immigrant ancestor or immigrant ancestors, at least the male one, my great grandfather, is not really remembered fondly. Whenever he's spoken of by the few people who are still alive who actually knew him, he's never really spoken of, in this caring, loving, kind way. And he was somebody who ruled with an iron fist, and I think it was, it had some good effects what he did. He had a bunch of professional children, but none of them really visited him or spent time with him as he died. My grandmother said she met him, I think, one time before he died. And I don't think my father ever met him. So I think it really, hammers home the importance of, like I said, integrity, kindness, and knowing how leadership isn't always with an iron fist. It kind of reminds me of what you were saying about your parents with punishment instead of correction. And so I have to, even earlier today, I was trying to get my son, I made him some oatmeal for breakfast. And he literally wouldn't eat it. And then finally, I was getting totally, I'm not even gonna lie, like I don't really get angry like that. That's not really like how I am anymore. But I was angry, you know what I mean? So finally I put a little bit, I was like, here, I put it on the spoon and I put it in his mouth, and he literally sat there with it in his mouth for like, I don't know, like 45 minutes. Like he would not chew it, he would not swallow it. And so I had to realize, like, all right, and I was getting angry and I was like, swallow it, chew it, and I realized that wasn't gonna work. I had to come up with another approach. He never ended up eating the oatmeal, if anybody's wondering. But, I realized that this, like, the anger wasn't working and wasn't helping. You know what I mean? And so instead, I was explaining to him why I wanted him to eat the oatmeal. After I was like, look, just spit it out. And I was like, this is why I want you to eat oatmeal, because it's healthy. It's going to help you, in everything that you want to do. It's going to help you think better. It's going to help, your digestion. You're going to feel better if you eat this meal. And, I realized how important getting his trust is. And getting angry wasn't necessarily making him trust me anymore. So I realized part of leadership is gaining people's trust and being trustworthy. And so those are things that I think I've learned from my father. and from the leadership that he brought to our household, and from everybody that I've heard that's met him in a professional setting or in a church setting, has always talked about his character and his integrity.
Judging by the comments, it looks like we need to bring Seymour Bell on to be a guest. So he wrote financial leader, money management. He said recreational leader, work hard, play hard, vacationing. Work leader, ethic, integrity, delegate, organize. Communication, getting past the first no or a no of convenience, not always saying, because I said so, in order for us to learn negotiation, emoting. Instilling confidence through validation, affirmation. Granddad would share, I am attempting to share with you, build you, so you are prepared to deal with the people who will attempt to tear you down or tell you what you're not. Great discussion. He said, I'm not adding or sharing or criticizing whatsoever. Well, I mean, I think that both of you, I love the fact that these conversations, number one, allow us to get to know each other better, but also this idea, like part of the reason why I'm going backwards is because unlike the two of you, I don't have any children to teach me the lessons of parenting. I have five siblings, five siblings, but I don't really. I mean, to be honest, I had all of those siblings when I was old enough that I feel like I was an only child. Like I'm gonna keep it a buck, and so it's hard for me to kind of have empathy sometimes when they talk to me about challenges that they go through. Mostly because I feel like they just have it so easy. And so I feel like maybe that's one of the things I haven't learned as a person that doesn't have children is to have greater empathy for the challenges of a new generation and to deal with new problems. Mostly because I kind of feel like that they have it easy. I feel like that they have they didn't have to be the first experiment of our parents or of their parents. That like I paved the way for them to basically have it easier, and they still feel put upon, still feel like the world is against them, and it's just like I don't get it because like the things that one of the lessons I learned from my father, so I have two fathers, a biological father and a stepfather. My stepfather raised me. And things I shared last week is that one of the lessons he taught me was that when you step up, you also accept responsibility. So he never called me his stepson. Even to this day, he calls me his son. And he says that I'm the only son that he has because he and my mother had two daughters. So I'm his only son. And he treated me that way. And he raised me to the best of his ability as a man, caring for the child of another man. But one of the things he taught me was, that was one of the things he taught me. That like when you step up to accept responsibility, you accept responsibility. At the same time, my father, my biological father, he was much more of a big brother to me than a father, in the sense that he would be the person I go to for advice. He'd be the person who when I'm having business success or challenges, he's the person I call. I call him because I feel like on some levels he's been through the things that I've been through. And so the major lesson I learned from him is steel sharpens steel. So I don't go to him with, things that I don't feel like he's really equipped to help with. I go to things that I feel like I know that he's done to varying degrees of success, and he can offer an insider outsider point of view. And so understanding the real value of your circle. This is something else I've been thinking about as well, like is the real value of the people that are part of your circle, not just from the point of view of leadership or community, but of just health and mental health and well-being. One of the things I don't think we've really talked about on any of these 19 shows is the role that love plays in leadership. And it feels like that should be something that naturally comes out of a conversation about what you learn from your family about leadership. But I didn't bring it up at all, I don't think, last week. Not because my family didn't teach me love, but because I mean, to be honest, because the love that I experienced as a child was really tough love. It wasn't it wasn't it wasn't the kind of nurturing love that a lot of people associate with family. I think today my family is very proud of me, but my childhood it was had varying degrees of trauma, most of which I've recovered from. But there was a lot of times where my Latino family would talk about me in front of me in Spanish to my mother, and so so that developed a kind of animosity between me and Spanish, because it became a language associated with belittling me in front of me. And I don't think my family knew that that's what they were doing. I think that they would say they were just talking in the language they normally spoken when I wasn't there, because they spoke Spanish as their primary language, even though everybody spoke English. Um, but it's interesting, like if I really think about what's gone well and not so well in terms of shaping my own ideas and understandings of community with family as the foundation. Um, how do you think that the things that you learned from your great grandmother, your your great grandfather, because those are the two you've talked about, um, trickles down to your parents, and then comes through you to your children? How do you feel like the things that you've learned from being a part of such a large, rich um, family, how do you feel like that's shaped the way you think about your family and your community prowess?
I think one around distribution, maybe of authority. And that's a little bit to kind of like thinking about like bee colonies, because very much the aspect of community centered leadership and dynamics and relationship dynamics was very present in my family. So the idea around sort of more democratic type of authority. So I, for very much, I had to listen to all my aunts and uncles. I had to follow, the word of my elders was treated with respect and with heart. And there wasn't a lot of opportunity to sort of divide and conquer, right? It was couldn't really, each one of my elders was empowered to make decisions for everyone. And versus idea of like the sort of queen bee, or my great grandmother I guess would have been that. My grandfather had empowered all of his siblings to have as much focus on the rearing of the children and his children, and him on their children, right? He raised all of their children. He raised them. So it was, as the older brother, it was very much like, yeah, what his word sort of is important, but it's no more important, I think, than those around him. And then really around like communication and information sharing. And you mentioned this, Mazi, around like my grandfather really learned how to sort of, he understood, I guess, what people's strength was, and knew how to communicate to each of us differently. So he didn't talk to us the way but he was a communicator. He would hours and hours and hours, right? People would, it would go in one ear and out of the other. But for me, I used to just like to hear my grandfather speak about everything. He had so many, I would call them zingers or whatever. He would have all these zingers and the stories that he would tell. He was a master storyteller. So for me, I would love to sit and listen to him just talk about his experiences. And it was always some kind of parable style storytelling. And I think a lot of that just kind of how I watched him communicate. He didn't do that with everyone. He barely talked to some people, and they didn't know him in that way, right? So when it became very, I think, obvious at some point that he was using those stories to convey more complex messages, maybe to inspire certain things and certain people that he realized that they needed, or to heal. Or closest aunt is about 7 years older than me. And so very much like an older sibling, she was the baby in the family really before I came around, and my grandparents, both of my parents were lived parents for the first probably 3 or 4 years of my life. And the idea of cooperation and teamwork and, also, like I said, that responsibility of being able to say, this is a helm, or us at the helm kind of providing the lessons and the leadership and the training, because we want people to be successful. We don't want to kick folks out of the nest and have them sort of go off and forage and have to, find things. Instead, it became a thing that my grandfather was responsible to make sure every sibling had a home when they left, that their families had a home, that every child, that had a home to go to, and you did not leave this kind of hearth until you had that opportunity. And so even though my parents were, my mom being the oldest daughter, being married and sort of living with them for years, it just felt like that's what was supposed to happen. It was the house. It was where everybody went. And I talk about this a lot, but my uncle, who played for Chuck Brown, he was the leader. He was the oldest son. And so a lot of the times all the musicians would be gathered at our house. So it was like, the house was like the house, right? It was everybody there. It was music. It was celebration. It was activating a lot of those types of elements of like I said, community in a different way, but leveraging the experience of the elders in the space to kind of change what we were all experiencing, or that, not having to go out and find out for yourself. You were able to appreciate the wisdom and accumulated knowledge that was in that house, and everybody came to seek that out. So for me, it was like, well, that's obvious. This must be a place rooted with a lot of intelligence that I need to follow. So for me, that was, I think, struck a chord more so than anything, was that learning sort of being a servant, that my success was needed to, and be a servant of that hive in order for me to really, I have to be, to follow, my performance has to follow what has been instilled in me.
I'm curious, perhaps I was going to interrupt you to ask, are you still a part of, you just talked about this idea of your home being a hub for a community. And I experienced that particularly with my Puerto Rican family in New York around holidays. But as my great aunts and great uncles got older, they actually moved down south, and those family gatherings just kind of stopped happening. Do you feel like you still experience this idea of your home or homes in your family being hubs for your larger family and the larger community? Or is that something that we're losing as we get older, move further away from our original families, or have family members move? Is that still something where you feel like either in your family or you're witnessing in other families that homes are still
Yeah.
hubs for communities?
I feel like that it has been going away more and more. I think the idea for many, when I got divorced and I moved back home with my parents, I remember there being like this stark kind of response from my friends of like, why on earth would you do that? And I thought, this is the safest place, right? It's my and while I left and moved out, I still live in their home. That there's a spirit of that, sort of like, while the essence is still here, even though there might not be as much. I think the pandemic also challenged gatherings a lot for a family, but we would still, my mom has 150 cousins. we all still have family day, a family day that we, it's a celebration of us as a family, sort of our unique kind of space and where we are. My aunt lives on Georgia Avenue. She had a hair salon, and so you can imagine the hub space just kind of moved to her space, and she's now in her 90s, but to that hair salon being sort of a cornerstone of community in Uptown Northwest, and that hub kind of like it moved, so it would change, I think, direction. It would change hands and ownership, but there's still someone that is the incubator of the hub, like that still manages to get everyone together. So it changed a little bit, but
I mean, I wonder from your own point of view and experience, like how are we being good stewards of our family's traditions if we're allowing them either to struggle or to change
Mhm.
or to go away as
Yeah.
our elders become less able to be the organizers of those things. And this isn't a criticism. It's just like, to be honest, I never like, I was a terrible family member. I just showed up for the holidays. I didn't call nobody. I didn't organize nothing. I didn't bring no plate.
Mhm.
I just showed up with an appetite and helped with dishes. You know what I'm saying? And so recognizing now in my midlife, like what am I doing to preserve the traditions that my family thought enough of to start now that some of them are gone? You know, like I've still
Yes.
got cousins who live down south. Should I be traveling? Should I be traveling down south now to reignite those traditions since they don't live in New York anymore? Should we be, there's still a very rich tradition in the African American community of family reunions that happen
Yes.
seasonally. It's a great way to see people. But I wonder how often the kind of baton of leadership for organizing those things is being passed to younger generations so they don't just show up, but they actually have to
Right.
do something. They have to call somebody. They got to drive somebody to make sure that you're still maintaining those family bonds. Um,
Yeah.
like what are you experiencing pre-COVID? Let's say
Yeah.
pre-COVID and now kind of in
You,
COVID.
you know what's funny, Mozzie, is when you say that, I feel like there's been a lot of responsibility focused on being a woman and growing up in that space versus being a man, because I feel like my male sort of cousins don't have the same type of baton expectation. There's not the expectation for them to go ahead.
Facts. Like I used to get in trouble. I used to get in trouble with my male family members. Got to go and wash the dishes with the women. They'd be like, "Why are
Yes,
you washing the
exactly.
dishes?" I'd
Yes.
be like, "This is wrong. That they made the food, they cooked the food, and they got to wash."
Yeah.
Man, please.
Exactly. And I think that's part, like, right, the expectation of sort of being demonstrating sort of in a matronly way kind of that initiative around it is your job to sort of curate and to continue to keep these traditions and to ensure the idea of housekeeping and the idea of sort of family keeping. Those are the things that you are supposed to curate. And so I think that was much more instilled in me, where my cousins would be playing, having video game tournaments, and I would have to set the table, and I would have to, make sure that the prayer was delivered, and I would have to make sure that like you said, the cleanup was done for holidays. And then I began to socialize with those people that were doing that, which then tended to be all my aunts and all the women in the family. And so it was much easier. And then I think about the fact that, again, the anchor of it being like a hair salon. My uncle's also a barber. So it's a very different kind of expectation of what would happen when he cuts all of the family, all of the men in my family's hair. My aunt would do all the, she's in her 90s now, but would do all of our hair, and it was a thing around like, you come there because it's really the preservation of the space, and honoring, this space, and the evolution of what happens next. And I think she was more so trying to seed, and him trying to seed, right, that like, who's going to be the next person that will continue to be, following this footstep. And so, yeah, I think that was for me for sure. The women got that trait a lot more than the men, who were sort of excused to go and have recreation. And, it was a different type of thing.
Yo, I got to tell you, I'm super inspired from this conversation that I want to either go to where the hub is or to help become a hub for my family, blood family and extended family, because it feels like there's too much responsibility. I think part of this is also just the fact that once people have their own families, their family
Yep.
becomes their focus. And as I
Yes.
think about it, like all of those gatherings were of mostly adults who had teenage children or grown children, not little kids. And so thinking about, as many of my friends now have kids that are in elementary school, going to middle school, like how is their life and their social life going to change? Like I see those folks at homecoming or at a block show or
Right.
something like that, but I don't generally see them throughout the year. And I think the same thing is true because, as a Muslim who doesn't celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas, or like,
Mhm.
I've never been invested in gathering for these holidays, but I feel like because all of my family are Christian and do celebrate these things, that I have to be willing to be in spaces that I wouldn't choose to be in, but still have value to me and to potentially my future children, if not just to my current wife. Um,
Exactly, yes. That's a big point.
and so and so I wonder, how do you feel like you are or hope to hand down those kind of traditions to your son, um,
Yeah.
and your cousin's children, et cetera?
Interesting because I watched the same dynamics happen with the younger generation of my family. Sort of like there's a whole entire generation that's just missing in action, right? So we just had a family gathering for to celebrate the 80th birthday and the 50th anniversary of one of my aunts and uncles. Um, and it just the generation that's missing one right under me. So it's like all the 20-year-olds and 20 something, and the 30 somethings are, we're all there with our kids or our spouses or whomever, or just family members, and then you have the younger generation under them. So my son, who's in middle school, and I feel like the elders, right, like he connects with them in a way I never could. And I'm talking about like my eldest of aunts, they all want to see him and he wants to see them. The first thing that they do when they get into the room is, where is Sean? Like, they have no interest in me yet whatsoever. And I think there's something that I kind of liken to that, the interest that my grandfather kind of took in me, to say, I see something different. I need to infuse this with you. They see something different in him that they need to infuse with him, and they connect to him in such a different way that it's so funny because I'm like, I'm not close to any of those elder aunts, but he is so, they're infatuated with him. And at first I thought maybe it's something around like they just didn't connect to me, and maybe it's a boy thing. No, it's just the fact that certain people have certain things that do align them, and the universe pulls, I feel like, those things together. But I do feel like part of that is then taking my son, which they will always, sort of reprimand me when I get on site. You haven't brought him to see me, recently. And I think there's the idea of that, being able to go to their homes, see what they're like, see them on their kind of home turf and their spaces, spending time outside of the celebration experience, just spending time, rooted in what's your day to day look like. What do what are the things still in him before they leave this planet? I realize it's kind of like maybe before they transition, they're trying to make sure that they let him know certain things that even they haven't even told me.
Now, I can totally relate to that. When my Jason talked about his father being living in Germany, non-military. My mother was in the Air Force, and so we lived in Germany for a period of time. And I would come home to the U.S. To visit with my mother's father, my grandfather, and my
Mhm.
my grandfather's sister, my great aunt. And I spent whole summers with them, really learning the family story, and in some instances
Yeah.
learning my own story that they hadn't that neither my mother or my father or my stepfather had told me. And it was always interesting to hear about their lives from the point of view of their family versus the stories about their lives that they told me. Like, if you invited my four sisters and my one brother on here, what would they say about me? It'd be a very interesting
Mhm.
conversation, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of what they would say would be as good as the things I say about me. But I think that's also important as we think about the ways in which our families are mirrors to ourselves. Like, they literally were the witnesses for the lives that we lived and the mistakes that we made and the growing that we've done. Um,
Yeah.
I want so Jason, we were just talking about kind of carrying on family traditions of things like family reunions or getting together for holidays. And I was talking about how, those traditions in many ways ended for me when my great aunt, who was the primary home that we all went to, moved to North Carolina. And so she and my cousins and her husband moved there, and we stopped gathering as a family. And so I wonder, just are there still major gatherings either in your now extended family through your wife, or that existed before your marriage that you're a part of? Are there ways in which your family gathers as a kind of community hub, even if it's just for family?
Well, the family, gathered for Thanksgiving, and I thought that was wonderful. We have family all over the country and sometimes out of the country. So, for us to, for the most part, all get together and, the way the family is extended. And, we talked about immigration, and we all, many of us made a trip this past summer to Barbados, which is where my great grandfather began his voyage. He went Barbados to Panama to the United States. And so we all went back to the source. And that was an experience for us to all be able to be together. Wasn't cheap, to bring my whole family, but we made it happen. And that was, an important thing. But I think a lot of times at a certain point, a lot of families just start getting together for weddings and funerals. And I'm hoping to never get there. And that's one of the reasons, Mazi, you started this off by talking about me inviting you to my house. My dad was actually here, and one or two other friends, and I wanted you to be a part of that. And part of that is because I'm trying to start new traditions. I'm trying to start new familial traditions and people that I consider to be family. I think I've had, just like I have a sister, and our relationship is complicated. And I think that family, I've expanded my definition of family, beyond just people that I share blood and ancestry with. So, in that regard, that's why, and I respect you, keeping your health first, because that's the most important thing. But, I want to make new traditions. I want my kids to see, new, people that I trust, and I want them to also to see that the importance of strong relationships. And that's a lot of that comes out of you know friendships, not just not family. Family are the people you don't choose. They're kind of there. But I want them to see the relationships and the kind of people that I want to associate with, and hopefully they'll model it in their own lives by bringing around good people.
You bring up a excellent point, Jay. This idea of forging new traditions is another kind of leadership. A friend of ours, Asad Ali Jaffrey, he often talks about the need for new myths. I wonder, have we ever thought about the mythologies of our families? This great great grandfather who wasn't well spoken of, or this man that worked in a lumber field. Because I was like, hold up, how your family immigrate to DC and he working in lumber? And you're like, no, he did that in North Carolina. And it's like all of this geography that our most immediate family has been a part of isn't necessarily part of the stories we bring to every conversation. And it feels like this is part of this has to be part of a new approach to leadership that really is learning about the whole person, their whole history, not just, here's the stuff we agree about, so that's what we talk about. But like, we're in a community together. There was a 50th anniversary for my fraternity chapter, and I was talking to the younger bros because all of them have kids that are old enough to be playing sports, and all of them are playing sports, but they never bring their kids together to play. And I'm like, why don't you bring your kids together to play with each other?
Mhm.
It's like, never really occurred to me. And it's like, it feels like this is like, there's some kind of some level setting or ground level work, foundation building to leadership that's missing from our conversation. Because if it's always abstract or organizational or focused on a cause, we're missing like really the way leadership shows up every day, in our lives, in our homes, in our works, in our challenges. And so I want to thank both of you for joining me today. It's crazy that an hour has flown by that quickly, but I feel really enriched by this conversation, continuing to learn more about each of you. And I hope that as we continue to bring more people into this conversation, we make that a priority to not just learn what they do and what they think and do you call yourself a leader, but like how does leadership show up every day in your home, in your family, and in your community, and be open to answers that are unexpected, or don't look like what any one of us might call leadership, to really make the conversations valuable, not just to us, but to the people that we're having them with. So I want to thank you both for joining today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. That's episode number 19 of No New Leaders. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, great. If you didn't, we'll do better next time. Feel free to share it with somebody, all right? This happens every single Sunday from 4:15 to 5:15 Eastern Standard Time. And I'm Mazi Mutafa, Executive Director of Words, Beats, and Life. And this was No New Leaders.
Some ideas, they shake you out of your sleep like when a toddler creeps. Totality of the deep, the mere thought of an unconscious manifestation carried out with the beat. Positive charged protons creating neural explosions. Time hiccups when fingers and pads touch. Dead air smiles because it knows what's coming. The countenance of the clock claps hands. The choreography of the knot slaps jams. And you be like, who made this? Vertebrae responding to the call so bad they make a B-girl curve the wall.